I think many of you will agree that in many ways we're under attack today. Whether it's our faith being outright attacked and threatened and people having to go to court because they're not allowed to say the name of the Lord, or imagine you're a coach wanting to pray before a game and that you lose your job over it and you have to take it to the Supreme Court. Many attacks on faith, many attacks on the family. We know this, and even church. Hello? There we go. Can you imagine a few years ago if I told you that the government's going to tell all the churches they had to shut down, they had to close, they had to lock their doors, prevent people from entering and worshiping the Lord and gathering, that they would have to shut the gates? At least in Florida, we have a lot of gated community, that the property itself would be barred from people gathering, and that it would be illegal to gather. We wouldn't have imagined this, right? I wouldn't imagine it. I would say there's a conspiracy theorist in our midst. So we see in so many ways the church is under attack. And I think all the time, myself personally, my family, me as a mom for my little 5-year-old, how can we resist? And there are many reasons and many ways, and I think God calls us in different ways to respond. And I think one way that impacts us all is that we've seen the need for community, and that it's been so much easier to survive and to thrive and to make it through hard times when we have someone else with us. And hopefully that's a dear friend or a sister or a spouse or an adult daughter or son. Hopefully we have that person, because when we don't, it makes life so much harder. So I always pray that everyone I speak to has that person, and if you don't, that you pray for it. And I know I've seen God work in my life, actually through my little 3-year-old. COVID hit and she was 1.5, and by the time a couple months had passed, she was aware that she had no friends her own age. And it's at that little age of 1.5 where they're starting to be amazed at little people, right? Hey, this person's like me, and they just go up and they're instant friends because they have something in common. So we've done our praying for friends in our life during hard times. But how beautiful to think that the power of community was revealed during COVID, and I think that makes it special to be with you here today. And I've had beautiful conversations with many of you when you came by the table or just in the hall, so thank you. Even coming to see my friend Ronnie, who made it possible for me to come, and then meeting her sisters. We had a day out on the lake. What a beautiful opportunity, again, to connect with other people of faith. So thank you for coming. Thank you for community. I'll share a bit about my story. I was 32 years old when I realized I had done absolutely nothing important in my life except get married. I had been in school my whole life. And, this was back in the day where the glory of life was to get a degree, and I fell for it. I got a BA, a master's, a doctorate. I had nothing else to do, so I got a postdoctorate. And I'm 32, finishing up, about to get my diploma, and I realized how empty life has been. But you know what? Now I can finally serve the Lord. Now I can do something meaningful and travel and everything else. Now I can have kids. I think that there's a lot of lies of the enemy in that mindset, but that's where I was. Of all things, I finished schooling in December, and in February, my husband and I are driving down from the north, and I'm so excited to share it with this crowd, because every single person here can picture the situation I was in. It was a highway. We're going 70 miles an hour. We have one lane, and the one lane is oncoming, and there's no shoulder because there's ice and there's cliffs everywhere. So it's very interesting how Branson is a lot like Northern Ontario. I have to go into detail in Florida, right? Because they can't possibly imagine a highway without, 50 feet from oncoming traffic and big shoulders. So you can picture exactly what it was. The car is coming toward us 70 miles an hour, and there's a bend in the road that car doesn't take. And just like Branson, in a split second, that car is right there in front of you with nowhere to go. So God forbid that any of us are in that situation, but that's where I was. For a flash of a second, I had two thoughts. One, I've done nothing important. Two, I'm dead. I did not pray. I did not think of Jesus. My life didn't pass before me. That's the only thoughts. I'm like, yep, I'm dead. My husband thankfully had a very different response. He had this hormone in his body that brought him down to play by play, second by second. Now, has anyone seen the movie Limitless? It's a little bit old now, but kind of the slow motion, and they duck away from all the bullets. That was like my husband. He could tell you a 30-minute talk about that split second and everything that happened. But when he felt literally so he had all these different options he thought about, right? If he goes into the shoulder, he spins out of control. If the car's coming this way, if he tries to veer onto oncoming traffic, he becomes totally out of control and might hit other cars, right? A much bigger accident. He literally figured of all the options, the very best one was for him to take the car dead on, slightly to the driver's seat, because it would wipe him out and take his life, but that he would take the full impact, and it was possible that neither car would spin out of control, and indeed that happened. Both cars came to a complete stop, and let me just say, my husband is alive, so don't worry about that. I don't want to create extra drama. So he takes the full impact of the car on him. Also in this split second, so he feels the wheels totally disengaged and the brakes. At that point, he has no control over what's going to happen. The car is halfway into him. He's already sees his engine being pushed into his body, and he thinks he's going to die. And then he thinks a number of thoughts. My poor wife will be left alone. She's going to be a widow. She's only 32. How's she going to get married if she's really ugly? So I better protect her face so that the glass doesn't scar her up and make her ugly, which will be a lot harder to get married. So he's worried about my looks and covers my face with his hand and pushes my head back, securing it against the headrest. And then with the rest of him, he just throws his body over me. He had his seatbelt on, he broke a rib, pushing his body on top of me. But literally, he took all the impact of all of the airbags. So his body was deep purple for months, and I had almost no bruising whatsoever, just a little bit on my knees. Two incredible miracles happened. One, because the engine had been pushed into his driver's seat, literally on his seat, he would have been crushed to death, no chance. And his whole left side was crushed. He has titanium hip, every single rib broke, if you can imagine. He's got like metal pieces holding him together. His ankles broke, but his knees were safe, and his right side was fine, except of course for the rib. He broke himself trying to save me. So he saved his life because the engine is sitting in the car, and the detective can't figure out how he's alive because he had a seatbelt on. So the story comes out that there was no computer that output my husband alive except for what he actually thought of on his own. He also saved my life. So I had a really bad brain injury, couldn't talk, I couldn't think, and I believe that it makes sense to think if his hand hadn't been there holding me and my brain injury was just a little bit more, then I would have died from a brain injury itself. I also would have died because I had 4 lacerations from the seatbelt. So no one knew how I was alive because they expected the airbag had been deployed. They saw that it had exploded, and that impact would have immediately put me into septic shock, and I would have died. I'll stop there. I would have died. Second of all, if I hadn't died from that, I would have tried to get out of the car. Apparently everyone does. And the minute I would have stood up a little bit again, I would have just died, gone septic. So God worked out miracles in that moment. Also, I guess my brain injury, I couldn't figure out how to get my seatbelt off. And apparently I'm like yelling and flailing and being a crazy person. And the person in front of us had been a retired firefighter. So of course he stops. He comes out and immediately just assesses me that I probably had lacerations to my bowels, and he bear hugs me to the chair against my will, fighting him for 48 minutes and doesn't let me stand up and get out. So he saves my life. And then the people in the back seat, so I heard, I didn't remember this, but the people behind us were 2 EMT ambulance workers. So apparently when he got very fatigued fighting me, they helped take me over. And between the 3 of them, they bear hugged me and held my legs down. Again, against my will, fighting them, yelling and everything like this. But God saved my life. I get to the hospital and the nurses are doing their job. They're asking me if I had eaten. When I had last eaten, they're preparing my body to do a dye test so that they would see where the holes are and they could laparoscopically fix me up in a few minutes. Well, the whole dye test and all these other tests take about an hour. And meanwhile, they've called the surgeon to fix me up. They know something's wrong. Do you know where she is? She's on her day off, and she's actually at the hospital having lunch with another surgeon at the hospital cafeteria. I'm not saying in a big way that's a miracle, but I can not imagine if I worked at a hospital, I would choose hospital food to eat on my day off on a Sunday afternoon. So I think it's fair to say, again, another little piece that God had planned. So she's eating cafeteria food with another surgeon. She comes up right away. She's an older woman, right? She's a senior person over everything. And she just, I don't think she was a Christian. She talked about like magic, and she didn't say the word miracles that I remember. But she has this feeling that she better just come and check on me before she changes and gets ready. And she looks into me and she tells the nurses that I'm almost dead. She said, look at her. She's turning blue and she almost looks gray. There's no time for your test. Forget about everything you want to do. Just put her in. Doesn't matter if she's eating or not. She has like minutes left, minutes and seconds to live. They just put me in the OR room. She opens up my whole torso, and old school. So I say she was an older woman because she was trained before they had dye tests. She knew to take all my organs out, if you can imagine it, feel manually for holes. The other surgeon she had been having lunch with stitched me up, and then she pulled me back together. So instead of a little hour, 40 minutes, it was a massive 10-hour surgery with like all my insides in a slightly new position. But God saved my life in many ways, and God saved Larry's life, and he had multiple surgeries. But in the end, it was all okay, and we were on the path to recovery in a couple weeks. One thing that was not so easily fixed was my brain injury. And I didn't know it, of course, but I began to realize after a few days when people asked me questions that I couldn't really answer them. I didn't really understand them. I'd want something on the inside, but I couldn't get it out. I couldn't really ask for what I wanted. I felt very alone, but also in a literal sense. I remember one night when I was back home a couple months later with my sister-in-law who had cared for me and was like babysitting me basically, I started crying and I was saying, you know, I can't believe that my family, they're good Christian people, I can't believe they didn't even come visit me and I almost died. Like, I can't believe that they don't really care about me. And she's like, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to correct you. They were by your side around the clock. And I was trying to tell her, no, they didn't even visit me 6 hours north. And like, so that's how alone I felt. Literally, my own family had driven there and was with me, and I had no memory of them being there. So regardless of the incredible care I had in the family and my husband's family who were local and took care of me around the clock and shifts, never leaving me alone, I felt like I was 100% alone and isolated and just sitting there in almost a timeless, dark state. But I can tell you that one thing I was sure of was the Lord's presence in a mighty way. And people say, were you a Christian? You know, did you rely on your faith? I was, but I couldn't rely on my faith because I had no brain power. Like, here I had a Ph.D. in the Bible, and I couldn't think of any verses except the one phrase that to live is Christ. And to my memory, for 3 or 4 days, it's all I thought of over and over. It would just play again and again. And my whole life I had taken that in the sense of life, you know, joy, peace, the will to live, all the invisibles and tangibles. But in that moment, over those days, I felt it more literally than ever before. I felt Jesus was the one holding me together. And the reason my blood was still pumping and I was still alive and surviving was the goodness of Jesus literally with me. So I'll talk a bit about my recovery of anxiety and all this. I want to say one more piece to the story. So today you'll see my husband a bit. He's walking around. But one thing is, 2 years later, they told me I couldn't have kids. So I've been trying so hard and taking all these tests, and I sit with the doctor, this specialist in Toronto, and he shows me a piece of paper. All I see is a number in a big font in the middle of the page, 0.0000001. And I'm thinking that cannot be good news, whatever it is. I don't know what he said. It's going on and on. Finally, he says, so after all this, really, that's your chance of having a child. And as devastating as you'd think it would be, it was actually a bit of a relief. I felt a complete burden lifted because I had been trying so hard to eat the right things or do the right things. And in that moment, I realized it was only going to be the Lord's grace and a miracle that would let me have this child, so I could just relax in the Lord. And of all things, I honestly stopped praying about it. I think I had been obsessing. There's intercessory, there's a good sense of prayer, but I was just obsessively asking God for a child and thinking I had no life and no meaning and no purpose if I couldn't have a child. But in that moment, I could surrender it to the Lord and say, God, you can work this miracle, but I'm going to live for you, and I'm going to find purpose and meaning in following you, whether or not you give me the gift of a child. So in terms of recovery, I'll give some points on overcoming anxiety, severe depression, severe PTSD that I struggled with for 5 years. And again, God could have intervened and healed me miraculously, but then I wouldn't have even known I had it, right? You only know you have depression because it gets revealed to you. It's not like an x-ray that shows you fractured yourself. So first of all, there was a time of rest and seclusion. And I open up on the importance of community, but there's also a time where a healthy sense of isolation when we go through a hard time is needed, where we just surround ourselves with a few people that we trust and love. And for me, that time of rest was important. I also needed time to let God naturally heal the chemicals in my brain so they would start producing the dopamine and all the other necessary chemicals to feel happy and to smile. I remember there was a moment where I was sitting on the couch thinking, I really would love some chocolate. If only I could drive. If only I could go down the street to a little gas station and just get myself a chocolate bar. I would feel so much better. And then it dawned on me that I actually could. Like, I could literally drive. I could literally walk down my stairs and get into the car. And the second I thought that I could, unfortunately, I knew I would have to. Some of you have that personality, right? When you think something is possible, then you've got to do it. So, Jill, I know I'm out of time. Do I have a couple more minutes?
3 more minutes.
Okay. So in that moment, I realized I would have to. So I get in the car and I just go, and I'm shaking, and my fingers were so nervous that I couldn't let go of the steering wheel when I arrived. But that was a moment of change in my life where God was able to teach me things. I had fear. I had so much fear, but I realized that it would take longer still to get over my fear. And if I just sat on my couch depressed, waiting for God to deliver me from fear, I would never do anything. So I learned the lesson that I would have to move forward in faith, even though I was still afraid. And that I began to think along those lines, and I returned to the women in the Bible that I had studied academically, and I realized a lot of them were probably terrified. Think about the midwives. It's a little story. I share about it in my book. These 2 women, they're just giving help to moms bearing children for the Hebrews. And one day, out of the blue, and we can relate to our lives dramatically changing in a single moment, unexpectedly, they're told to kill all the babies. Imagine your job is to bring life and you're told to kill them. What did they do? Were they afraid? The Bible doesn't need to tell us. Of course they were afraid. They were terrified. They either have to listen to the king of Egypt and save their life and kill all the babies and devastate the lives of these women that they love and care for, or they save the babies, which they know is right, and they commit treason and will die. But they choose what's right. And what I love about the midwives is, to me, it's a picture of 2 women willing to do the right thing and to move forward in faith despite their fear. And God calls us to say yes. So whatever God is calling us to do, can we have a willingness to say yes to the Lord despite the fact that we might be terrified, despite the fact that we might not be healed of all the things that have happened to us, the trauma, for me, the brain injury. I had many limitations. But I'll close on this, another beautiful point is that God is our strength. So if you feel strong in yourself, that's really good. And I think we've heard some beautiful people speak yesterday and today that seem so strong in themselves, and God anoints them to speak. And that's so beautiful because they bring just the anointed presence of God. But then there's others, and I'll put myself in that case, I live in my weaknesses. But do you know what's so amazing about that? Is that all the strength I have, all the confidence I have, Oh, the willingness to say yes, even when I'm shaking with fear, that's the Lord's strength at work within me. So I don't need to be so strong. I just think, Lord, I'm weak again, and hallelujah, because that means I'm going in your strength, which is way better and way easier. So God bless you. Please come talk to me. I have the book. If you like what I'm saying and the inspiration of the women in the Bible, I wrote a Bible study on 8 stories of women in the Bible and how we can be encouraged and inspired by their life. Typically ordinary people that do extraordinary things for God. And please come talk to me anytime today. I would love that. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on The Connection Show. Our show is made possible by your support. Please go to our website and click on the Affiliate Partners page now. You can support us either on Venmo or our Cash App today. We love our podcast guests and our social media subscribers. Our channels are made possible by you, our listeners. Please go to our website and go to our Contact Us page and click on all our social media pages. Make sure you click the bell on YouTube and subscribe, and the follow us button on Rumble. Our affiliate partners are featured on our show, and we thank you for supporting them and their products. Each of them have fabulous offerings with discounts when you mention Braveheart when you order. Please order today by going to braveheartworkshops.com and clicking on Affiliate Partners.